Now let's proceed to our lesson, which is the self, society, and culture. So this time around, let's identify the relationship of the self formation with our society and culture. But before we go further, let's define self first. The self is commonly defined by the following characteristics. So what are these? So it is separate, self-contained, independent, consistent, unitary, and private. So first, the self is separate. It is meant that the self is distinct from other selves. The self is always unique and has its own identity. One cannot be another person. Even twins are distinct from each other no matter how similar you are with your brother or your sister. You are not your brother, nor you are not your sister. And your brother and sister is not you. That's why you should not compare yourself with other selves, because no matter what you do, you are unique and different from other selves. Second, self is also self-contained and independent because in itself it can exist. Its distinctness allows it to be self-contained with its own thoughts, characteristics, and volition. It does not require any other self for it to exist. So it means further that you don't need to comply requirements for you to exist. You have the freedom to believe what you want to believe. You are allowed to contain your thoughts, feelings, emotions, or express them through actions. So the self is also consistent because it has a personality that is enduring and therefore can be expected to persist for quite some time. So its consistency allows it to be studied, so described and measured. Consistency also means that a particular substrate's characteristics, tendencies, and potentialities are more or less the same. So say for examples, sorry, if you know someone who has the tendency to be egocentric and does not like to listen to other people or does not like to receive criticisms from other people, these egocentric characteristics would become apparent in his doing of things. So probably if he is in a group, he often makes conflict among members because he or she does not want to accept his or her own mistakes. So they does not want to accept suggestions from other from their groupmates. They only see themselves and technically they lack the ability to empathize. So empathize is to put yourself into the situation of other people. It means seeing the point of view of other people. But an egocentric person does not know how to do empathy. Now, on the other hand, if you know someone naman who is by nature organized and goal-oriented, again, it will always show in everything that he does. Say, say for example, in his academics, career, and even a little thing such as simple task at how at home. So a person like this often has a checklist or planner which guides him in the attainment of his goal. So we have to remember that these characteristics or tendencies are always present in every pattern of our actions and behaviors. They are very difficult to hide because they become a part of us, they become a habit. And according to many, old habits die hard. So self is unitary because it is the center of all experiences and thoughts that run through a certain person. So it's like the chief command post. So an individual where all processes, emotions, and thoughts converge the self gives meaning to all of these emotions and everything that goes in our mind. That goes in our mind. So of course, it is also the self that decides whether a particular experience is significant or not. And finally, the self is private. So how we process information, feelings, emotions, and our thoughts is never accessible to anyone, but the self itself. So it suggests that self is isolated from the external world. It lives within its own world. Every self has its own inner universe, and no one can access to that inner universe but the self. So as much as self is separate, unitary, self-contained, independent, consistency, and private characteristics, the self as well is greatly influenced by external factors, which actually provide everything that we experience. So these experiences compose the external reality that we have, which eventually shapes the self one way or another. So this makes the self ever-changing and dynamic. So this perspective is known as the self-constructionist, which argues for a merged view of the person and his social context where boundaries of one cannot be easily separated from the boundaries of another. This supports the idea that no man is an island, so you influence other people as well as they also influence you in return. So, how do we exactly influence one another? Of course, that is through communication and interaction. So, through exchange of ideas, opinions, beliefs, and culture. That is why it is social. Our social interactions influence the shaping of ourselves. And because we always have this communication and interaction in our lives, the self has been in a dynamic state, meaning it is not static. So imagine a wheel which does not stop the self. Is like that. So the self always moves and adjusts to the events of the society. So the self is malleable, like a clay. It can take any shape depending on the situation that is in. So say for examples, if you are at home, you can be the obedient daughter or son, or you can be the lazy or disorganized person that you are. So however, if it happened to have a field trip with your classmates and teachers, you become conscious of your mess. So one way or another, you would try to be organized just for that circumstance. So another example is how you address people. So you have different manner of speaking at home. You can be the sweet, joker, or informal person, but however, you are not going to talk to your instructors in the same way. You would try to use po and opo, or ho and oho, probably, and be more respectful. So most of the times with this, we can say that the self is capable of morphing or fitting itself into any circumstances it finds so itself in. Maybe you would ask me, how can we exactly remain the same person if we always turn into a chameleon by adapting to our social situations? So a French anthropologist, Marcel Mauss, has an explanation for this phenomenon. So according to him, every self has two faces, the person and the moi. The moi refers to a person's sense of who he is, his body, and his basic identity. So his biological givenness person, on the other hand, is composed of the social concepts of what it means to live in a particular institution. So a particular family, a particular religion, a particular nationality, and how to behave given expectations and influences from others. So from this, we can infer that if the moi is our real face, the person is the mask that we wear in every situation that we have. So mask as in plural, because of course, we will encounter various situations in our life, and in every situation, we will wear different masks. So for example, for OFWs, they need to adjust with the cultures of the country they are in. So in order to survive, so if here in the Philippines, they can just neglect traffic rules and garbage disposal rule. If they're in Japan or Singapore, they cannot do the same thing because basically it is not their territory. They need to practice the laws in that country or else they would be thrown outside the country that they are in. So this very situation applies as well to how you pronounce adjust. So if you are not in your territory or if you are not in Marawi City, and how Cebuanos and Surigaonons become culturally sensitive in Marawi, how they avoid speaking of haram words, especially in public places. Language is another interesting aspect of social constructivism. The Filipino language is incredibly interesting to talk about. The way by which we articulate our love is noted by the phrase mahal kita. So this of course is the Filipino translation of I love you. So the Filipino brand of this articulation of love, unlike in English, does not specify the subject and the object of love. So there is no specification of who loves and who is loved. There is simply a word for love, and that is mahal. And the pronoun kita, which is a second person pronoun that refers to the speaker and the one being talked to. In the Filipino language and in English, there is no distinction between the lover and the beloved. So they are one. Interesting. Two is the word mahal in Filipino. So the word can mean both love and expansive. So in our language, love is intimately bound with value, with being expensive, being precious. So something expensive is valuable to someone. Whom we love is valuable to us. So the Sanskrit origin of the word love is love, which means desire. So technically, love is a desire. Developing a word for it is another intonation apart from mere desire. Valuable. Another interesting fact of our language is it's being gender neutral in English, Spanish, and other languages. The distinction is clear between a third person male and third person female. Pronoun. So he and she. Filipino, it is plain siya. There is no specification of gender, so our language does not specify between male and female. So we both call it siya.
The self and the development of the social world. This topic concludes four questions such as 1. How do people actively produce their social world? 2. How do children grow up and become social beings? 3. How can a boy turn to be just like an ape? And the last one, how do twins coming out from the same mother turns out terribly different when given up for adoption? Now let's move on to George Herbert Mead and Lev Vygotsky, also known as Mead and Vygotsky theory. The first one is by Noam Chomsky. Human person develops with the use of language acquisition and interaction with others. 2. The way we process an information will normally form an internal dialogue in our head. It's like encoding an information in our head. Language is being experienced in the external world and encountered in dialogue with others too. A young child internalizes values, norms, practices, and social beliefs and moves through exposures to these dialogues that will eventually part of his individual work. According to Vygotsky, he believes a child internalizes real-life dialogues that he had with others, with his family, caregivers, or his or her playmates. These sentences explains that childs rely so much on what they learn from others. And the last one, they apply this to their mental and practical problems along with the social and cultural infusion brought about by the dialogues. Now we move on to number 2, set in families. While every child born with certain givens, disposition coming from his parents' genes, and general condition of life, the impact of family is still deemed as a given in understanding the self. Next, the kind of family we are born will certainly affects us and the kind of development that we will have as we go through life.
Without a family, biologically and sociologically, a person may not even survive or become a human person. One is who he is because of his family for the most part. Gender and the self. Gender is one of the loci of the self that is subject to alteration, change, and development. We have seen in the past years how people fought hard for the right to express, validate, and assert their gender expression. However, it is important to give one of the leeway to find, express, and live his identity. Oftentimes, society forces a particular identity onto us depending on our sex and gender.
Individual fits in a particular environment is dangerous and detrimental in the goal of finding oneself, self-determination, and growth of the self. Gender has personally discovered and asserted, not dictated by culture and the society. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something from this lecture or lesson.